welcome to the Arlington Hotel here in Dublin City Centre. Just behind us, I don't know quite sure if you can hear it, Don't Look Back in Anger is playing by Oasis. And I wonder whether the Ravens will look back in anger when they turn around and see what's happening up I-95 in New Jersey when John Harbaugh will be coach of the New York Giants. The news is broken overnight. The deal is all but done, but we're going to talk about it as if John Harbaugh is the next head coach of the New York Giants. Brian O'Leary is with myself, Shane, Brennan and Brian. You're a Giants fan. How are you feeling?
Pretty ecstatic, to be honest, Shane. It's feels like it's long overdue that we're finally getting a head coach, with all due respect to the other head coaches that have gone over the past few years, that was going to come in, demand the room, demand the team, put a proper structure around this organisation, in sync with the GM, Joe Shane. But like, his track record is second to none. And Ravens fans, I don't know whether they're delighted or sad over the course of the last week, because when you take a step back and you reflect on John Harbaugh in Baltimore, and I know like there's inevitability that some head coach will move off. 18 years there, 12 playoff runs. They win a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco as quarterback, and he shakes loose, and everybody was after him. When you see all the teams going after him, it kind of signifies how good and how big a name he is in the NFL space.
But here's the thing. Let's talk about the Joe Shane point for a second, because whenever we talk about these head coaching vacancies, we're trying to figure out what is the attraction for each of them. We get the attraction with the Giants. They're a blue chip franchise, 4 Super Bowls over the course of their history. You know, they're like winning in New York is unlike winning anywhere else. That's something you're saying. Interesting, because no New York major team has won since 2011. Interesting that Harbaugh is now being tasked with finding a way back to the Super Bowl with the Giants. But the Joe Shane point is interesting because there's a lot of pressure on his shoulders. The talent that Harbaugh's had to work with in Baltimore, people often complain about the fact that Lamar Jackson has never had a sort of type A receiver to play with when it comes to the playoffs. Harbaugh's decisions, I mean, people like a colleague of mine always refers to Baltimore Ravens as being boneheaded Baltimore in terms of consistently making a mess of these situations. You know, what is the relationship now going to be like between Shane and Harbaugh when it comes to actually talent acquisition? Because we all can talk about how great Harbaugh is as a head coach, but he has to work with what he's being given to work with, and it needs to be a successful.
I think Joe Shane remained in situ because he could point to 1 or 2 drafts where he's hit the golden ticket. Like, Jackson Dart went to the back end of the first round in terms of a trade up, but I think it's fair to say right now he looks like he's a legitimate quarterback in this league for years to come. Malik Neighbours is a standout wide receiver. It was very difficult to get that one wrong. He's a top wide receiver in that particular draft. Scotabo was a 4th round pick. He's come in and done really well. The Brian Burns trade that he pulled off in terms of the value which he gave away was great from the Giants' perspective. He's obviously had a standout season. Dexter Lawrence, when he's on his game, is fantastic. Kayvon Thibodeau, you could say the jury's still out, but on its day again, another really stellar player. I think in certain parts he's got things right. Also, there's a lot of things he's got wrong in terms of free agency moves and players walking out the door that have gone on to have great careers. 2 of them playing for the Seahawks now in the playoffs defensively. Saquon Barkley going on to win the Super Bowl. So I get why Giants fans are of the opinion we should move on and get a new GM. I think he's probably going to save his job, because if John Harbaugh comes in and has a really good season as a head coach, and a good season for the Giants next year, I imagine would be being competitive, winning 7 or 8 games, they're not going to let go of the GM because he's kind of on the coattails of a really good head coach that's come in there. I do think where Baltimore haven't probably supplied him with the best players around, I think Giants to a certain extent have that for him to work with, and there's a free agency coming up, and then also you got a top 5 pick, 5th pick in the first round of the draft. Again, another opportunity to get a really compelling player in there. So I do think he's got a lot to work with. And the NFL, Shane, as you know well, look at your Patriots. This time last year, the Patriots were picking 3rd in the draft, and you were concerned about Drake May not being the selection. Here they are, 1 game away from being in the championship game. The Broncos are the 4th seed in the AFC. Look what they've done under Sean Payton. The Bears with Connor's team, Ben Johnson goes in there 1 year. Even last year, they didn't have a good season. This year, the Commanders made the championship game last year with Dan Quinn. The NFL is such a topsy-turvy environment. It's not against the realms of possibility. This time next year, the Giants could be in the playoffs. I think it might be a bit of a stretch. But again, the way the NFL is with head coaching, you never know.
Well, the NFC East is as well. I think it's definitely a more competitive division. But let's talk a little bit about the comparison with the Patriots. By the way, we are here in the Arlington Hotel. If you want to watch the divisional round matchup between the Patriots and the Texans, it is on here on screen. Make sure you come down to watch it on Sunday. We highly recommend. But let's talk about what's next now for the Giants, because Harbaugh, we remember, came in as head coach of the Ravens as a special teams coordinator before he came in. He's not necessarily a particularly offensive or defensive guy. They've had some great coordinators. Mike McDonald has now gone on to do a really good job in Seattle for one of them. Harbaugh is definitely a culture guy, And I think the Giants needed a culture guy. They needed to get the stench of losing situation that should be winning out of the building, like what we've seen being successfully done in Chicago, for instance. But who does he need now to help him? Who do you think are the coordinators that could push the Giants towards being in the playoffs next season?
It's very early days in terms of putting names on the table. I'm not going to go down that road. People are suggesting already, it's inevitable he's going to bring his familiar face from Baltimore. I tend to think he may not do that. I think he might go for a fresh field because he's walked out of Baltimore on the wrong end of the season when they've lost on the last weekend of the season. Easily could have won, missed field goal, and we could have been here in a very different story. But sometimes when head coaches make a change, I suppose like the initial assumption is they're going to bring in all the same guys from his team that he's just had in his last environment. I don't think that's the case. I think he'll look for some from fresh field. I don't think it's a write-off as well that they will look maybe potentially to keep people in check. The temporary defensive coordinator did quite well in the back end of the season. He's going to interview for the Dallas Cowboys as the defensive coordinator. That kind of, for me, is a kind of a point in fact that he's a really young and up-and-coming coach. Maybe they look at that. It'd be interesting to see what he does offensively because Mike Kafka is already interviewing for jobs. I kind of get the sense if anybody's watched the Hard Knocks in-season NFC East, it was very evident in his last press conference with the Giants team. Sorry, his last kind of discussion with the team. He is essentially out the door. It'd be interesting what he's going to do because he's going to have to develop Jackson Dart now, and he's going to need to make sure he brings the right guy in. And the problem now is when you bring in an offensive coordinator who's young and up-and-coming and he has a really stellar period with a quarterback, inevitably he's going to get an opportunity to go coach somewhere else. That's always kind of a stumbling block for most teams in the league. Are they going to be here in 2 years looking for an offensive coordinator? But initially, I would think from talking to a number of people connected, they think the Giants will look to evaluate the offensive side of the ball with fresh faces to come in and try to help Jackson Dart.
Love you two in the connected there. I was like, who are you talking to? Tony Soprano?
For source. I do have me, it's...
yeah, no, you do in fairness. Well, look, that's plenty to look forward to in terms of a team that's in the off-season. But there are still 8 teams gunning for this title. We'll be talking more about the teams facing off the divisional round over the course of the week. But for now, thank you very much for listening to the Irish NFL Show.